So I would like to present our guests of this program, saying hello to all our audience. This is Elisabeth Schimpfossl, a senior lecturer in sociology and policy in Aston University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, an investigator in the field of Russian Soviet politics and the history. And as I know, you focused in your research in sociology of elites, power, and social inequality, and comparative research into media and journalism in post-communist Europe. That's right?
That's correct.
But actually, taking into account your rich experience in researching both Russia and post-Soviet history and reality, I decided to build my interview and conversation on the basis of popular questions from the works of Russian classics. You know this. Who is to blame and what to do? So that's why your new book that we're going to talk about today, called Rich Russians, From Oligarchs to Bourgeoisie, and it might help to find the answers to these questions. So my first question will be like this. Who is this typical rich Russians, and what role did this group of society play in the current situation in Ukraine and in all the world?
Well, I can't keep up either with Chernyshevsky or Lenin, I'm afraid, but I can talk a little bit about the Russians, especially those I interviewed and also those I've observed. We've got in the West this clear idea that with Putin's presidency from 2000 onwards, that there has been ever since a big assault on the oligarchs, and the oligarchs had been sidelined, which of course is absolutely not true. Yes, Khodorkovsky was sent to Siberia, and Berezovsky and Kuczynski had to leave the country. But otherwise, with Putin's regime, there was also a golden era for the oligarchs, unless they caused him trouble. But otherwise, it was the country to be Russia ever since Putin came to power. Compared to other big countries where inequality was also rising and the rich getting richer every day, one was nowhere as well off. One was an oligarch as in Russia, and getting ever richer. And this, of course, also implied dancing around the Kremlin and collaborating with the Kremlin and having good relations to the Kremlin. So, yes, of course, they are full-on responsible for the Putin regime by having supported it all along and having been playing along with everything, more or less what Putin decided. They're certainly not happy about the war. Hardly any of them, if anybody at all. But nevertheless, they've shown that they are pretty good at adapting to the situation and making the best out of the situation for themselves. What we see now with all the Western companies, many of the Western companies leaving Russia, that the oligarchs who've proven to be loyal get their bits from what remains from the market shares they can take over.
You spoke to these people. Can you explain from your point of view why they live in their country for the West? They always drag this so-called savok, or this old Soviet past, Soviet environment, Soviet mentality to the Western countries. Why?
In terms of their acceptance, that's also a true two-pronged thing. After all, the West has always embraced them, especially the money. So here in the UK, in London, everything's been done for rich people from China, other countries as well, but especially Russia, to come here. There were hardly any background checks. London has had millions and millions of dirty money come in, and people were, the City of London and the lawmakers here were most happy about that. So in that respect, they were embraced, but they've always had been left in a situation where the top establishment here had looked down on them. But they've also done quite a good work for that to be reduced. If you think of someone like Len Blavatnik, he was knighted by the Queen. It was back in 2015 after he gave a lot of money to philanthropic projects that were pretty much vanity projects. His School of Government and Governance and Government in Oxford, called Blavatnik School. His new Tate Tower, Tate Modern Tower, called Blavatnik Tower, and so on. The thing is that in contrast to Western elites, they've never learned, it was also necessary in Soviet, post-Soviet culture, this kind of ease with which Western elites communicate, this kind of elite demeanor, this kind of relaxedness of a certain sort. And of course, many Russians of that age also are not particularly fluent in English necessarily. And of course, they've always also been offended and felt insulted that they haven't been fully integrated into the establishment here. Others have. Abramovich is said to be the best connected and most respected oligarch among the UK establishment. But then again, they are also not stupid in terms of securing this kind of what they're lacking through their children by sending them to the most expensive elite schools and make sure that the children will be global citizens and don't have these certain hurdles anymore. Nobody here in the UK wanted to cut off the rich Russians. They loved them here. Yeah. We saw that right from the start, 2 days before the invasion, when Boris Johnson announced the first individual sanctions, and he put on the list 3 people who have the very few ones who have very little dealings here. It was Timchenko and 2 Rottenbergs. He could have chosen basically anybody from the Forbes Russia list, and he would have had good chances for the people to sit around here and actually getting targeted, getting hurt by the sanction. He then caught up, it was about 2 weeks later, they even tried to save Abramovich, which was funny. The problem is, if the UK population knows any oligarch's name, then it's Abramovich because of the Chelsea Football Club. So Abramovich, of course, had to be brought to the altar, but he got fine off anyway. So the people here, we saw that, for example, with someone like, let's take all the young the reformers or inspired by those ideas who've been adored here for years on end. And if we talk about principles in particular, not only the money laundering or whatever dodgy business practices, if you just look at principles, someone like Arwen, like many other reformers from the time, they hugely admired the dictator General Pinochet. So what Barwen and others of the generation suggested right from the start after the collapse of the Soviet Union was to go down a route of the Chilean reforms under dictator Pinochet. They did it to some extent, but not in all respects. Not important. Arwen was still in the early 2000s, wanted Putin to implement more dictatorial measures in order to push through neoliberal reforms. That didn't bother anybody here in the West, which also has a logic because Margaret Thatcher was a fan of Pinochet too. But in terms of principles, we have not exactly the most democratic principles, and that didn't bother a single soul. It was only, and it took a while, that the industry here, the wealth industry and the lawmakers were forced to turn around and cut ties with the Russian oligarchs, which many even didn't. I mean, so many, and they have no other countries where you have so many lawmakers having direct business dealings with wealthy Russians. Here in the House of Lords, it's massive amounts. And of course, once you sit on a board of your board of trustee on a big Russian company, can even easily be a pocket money up to 10 million a year. So if you're not in public eye, it would be interesting to, I don't have the figures, how many of the lords here in the upper house have actually not cut their ties. I hope an investigative journalist will find it out for us.
It's very important to hear from you that we really overestimate the Western elites because their goals and their perception of the world is much more alike. So it doesn't matter if you're Russian or not. But
I wouldn't say here that actually, it was also wrong to say that people are bad. And that the problem is that oligarchs pursue their own interests. There's a logic in it, and probably if you and I had this amount of billions, we now think not having billions, oh, we would never, ever act this way. There's probably no guarantee that we might actually reason in a very different form if we had that billions.
Next question will be based again on the quote from your book. Just few people fully understand why they ended up on the sanctions list. So are they being lying about this, or are they just trying to partition themselves from the regime? And if they do not really understand, then what consequences of these sanctions are expected by the West?
Yeah, that is also a difficult question. Of course, if you think in terms of sanctions, individual sanctions, that it only must hit someone who's really, really responsible, then you get into trouble, because what does being responsible mean? Does responsible mean that you finance something concrete in Putin's regime circles that directly harmed Ukraine? Or have you been complicit because you've always played along? Of course, once you have billions, you have to have good relations with the Kremlin and actively cultivate these good relations. It's impossible otherwise. There may be very few exceptions, but that doesn't really work. So, are you guilty or not? If you had to play along, you might have not wanted to, but you had to because you didn't want to go have your business anything but flourish. Well, difficult. Where exactly do you draw the line? And in general, it's so funny. Here in London was to an extreme that when there were interviews coming out with, for example, Friedman complaining that he doesn't know how to pay his cleaning lady. So many people responded in a sense of, oh, maybe we're not fair to them, and maybe we shouldn't have sanctioned them, and so on. We never ever think the same when it comes to economic sanctions that hit a whole population. Just think of Iran. Iran under sanctions for God knows how long. Have we ever shed a tear because some farmer peasant in some mountain village can't feed his family, and then think, why is this peasant, this farmer in the mountain village really responsible for the Ayatollahs or not? You don't give a damn about that.
What motivates these oligarchs to try to find the support at Putin to save their own skins?
Yes.
And after all, I'm sorry. And after all, it shows this impotence, yes, of European diplomacy and of European law instruments that they use during all these years.
Yes, I mean, it's especially here in the UK, but also all over Europe, it's quite a homemade, self-made problem the Europeans created. So what we have now since the war is an odd situation. So far, the Russian billionaires could always have their cake and eat it. In Russian, kind of dance on sit between the chairs, from Russian translation, and make their money in Russia, where it's so much more easy to make money, and at the same time have the West at their feet, the lifestyle and everything around, but most importantly, also a chance that if kind of things, because of course Putin is capricious, they can jump into a private jet and come over here to London. Not having that anymore, of course, the only way out to not lose your big empires is to side with Putin, and we've seen that with quite a number of cases, or alternatively do what Tinkoff did and turn their back on Russia and throw in the towel and give up their Russian citizenship for now. I mean, the sanction policy is, of course, you could say, would it have been better if the West hadn't sanctioned those people who are now much closer to Putin? Maybe they could have been, one could have worked with them. But at the same time, we've done that for so many years, and it didn't particularly go anywhere. Very tricky.
On the other hand, we closer get to the question, what to do exactly, and this is very interesting position that I found in your book as well. So you say about their unsatisfied women that now have to stay at the same house completely. They completely pisses them off because they are under sanctions. They have to stay in this certain place. They're limited in the money. So all these things in your book presented as one of your friends added. Again, because of women, the revolution will begin. No one but women can bring the oligarchs to their knees. So let's bet on women in this situation, taking account our previous points that we already discussed.
Yeah, I haven't followed that up yet, but I mean, there's a certain history. We've had the February Revolution started by women. We had, while the Chechen war and the soldiers' mothers being very impactful in bringing things to an end. The Kremlin knew that. They took precaution prior to that by making sure that they silence any attempts of mothers who lost their sons to that war. Basically suffocating any attempt right from the start. Now, with so many young men fleeing Russia, also interesting what dynamic that can bring in Russia with having an overload of women be behind. We've seen in many more situations that that's brought about quite emancipatory dynamics, because then it was the women who were considered to be able to do all kinds of jobs left in the factories, running them, and then of course after the end of the war, not particularly excited about going back to the kitchen only. Okay, we don't have the problem in Russia. Well, I'm just I'm thinking while talking while thinking. Studielets, if I knew. I'm holding my breath that Europeans and Americans, so many fears out that they might withdraw the actually not that great support they give to Ukraine at the moment. I think they could be doing much better.
You have done more than 80 interviews with the oligarchs, with their women, with their environments. And can you tell me the main points? Do you understand from whom? This is the question that I ask mostly all of my guests in the program. So from whom we can wait any actions? From the grey masses, the silent people who are mostly afraid, mostly, let's say truthfully, illiterate in politics, and they are out of politics. From war people, I mean from military people, no. From oligarchs, no. From people from culture, obviously no. They refugees now mostly in European countries. So did you understand the soul of Russian people? Can you say from whom we can expect any actions?
There are young readers out there on TikTok who live their own lives, book nerds, they want to read, and they will also secure that they will find a way to read what they want and have their favorite writers write what they want. So maybe something new can emerge from...
You mean we just have to wait while they grow up?
No. they're perfectly able to start a revolution.
Yeah, I understand. But on the other hand, there's one more power that we call fourth power. It's journalists and the people that have real power, but not in Russia, obviously. They're not free press. But I know that you have researched the history and the principles of Russian journalism as well. You have another book about this, actually. What are the main conclusions that you draw from the research, and what is the most importantly, how can this expensive and beautiful propaganda, beautiful packaged propaganda machine of such channels like Russia Today, Sputnik, what else we had, Zvezda and others, how this machine can be backed up, if it's really possible, and make them a real fourth power and push the people from behind?
Well, in the book we're writing now, my colleague and I, we look at the media elite in Russia and this idea of adekvatnost, which actually accelerated authoritarianism in Russia. So let's put that aside. What I just said before, it might well be not the journalists themselves triggering a change, but like these TikTok users who just are not impressed. Whatever the Kremlin decides to do, they read what they want, they share what they want. They might be no longer allowed, but look at how people responded to the Kremlin ban on social media platforms in March. You have no other country where such a big part of the population uses VPN. Mm-hmm. So there might well be a push from young Russians who just can't be bothered, who then in turn allow the media and journalism to have more influence. Media and journalism in exile on its own will not, they need the push from their readers and consumers in order to get anywhere.
I want to get back to Russia and its perception in the world and what people will do with this information at the end of the war. I was thinking about this today in the morning, and what I want to say to you, this cult of grandeur turned out to be artificially assembled together from stolen historical facts. The painted imaginary, you know what it means, Potemkinskие деревни, Potemkin's villages, right? From the facade of luxury Moscow or St. Petersburg cities in Russian Federation. But this romantic perception of Russian mafia as well, very effective as a perception of Russian grandeur states. But what stands on the other part of the scale? I would say, absolutely deceived, absolutely robbed, weak-willed and thrown away population of Russia without gas lines in the gas country, the gas lines at homes and with toilets outside. So this great history of Russia doesn't even begin from Kievskaya Rus. You know what it means, yes? And it's surrounded by self-made myths, their state. And even Tsars, or the leaders of Russia in the modern history, were not Russian in origin at all before the Soviet era. So all this information, will it change the perception of Russia in fashionable passion of Russian culture, like ballet or theater, literature, like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and so on? Do all these stereotypes about greatness of Russian nation will be accepted in the Western world after all these fallen masks in this terrible, terrible, tragic war in Ukraine?
I wouldn't say that the picture of Russia was all that great here. I remember an interview with a young Russian, the son of some rich guy, saying, "Oh, there's so many stereotypes. When people hear Russia, they think vodka, Medvedi bears, and prostitutes, and he wants people to think Dostoevsky, Mariinsky, and God knows what else." So actually, there isn't there's never been such a good. It was here. It was the ones who benefited from Russian money coming in, who invited also dirty Russian money come in and made a lot of cash on that basis themselves. Russia's never had such a good image, and the Potyomkinskaya Derevnia, there's not so much to crumble down. You said before it's exposing some hypocrisy. I wished it exposed more of Western hypocrisy. There was maybe 5 months ago or so, Akunin, what's his name?
Boris Akunin?
Yes. Mm-hmm. He said something quite interesting. He said in this long interview that the West made a big mistake. The West should have, right after already 2004, but certainly 2014, pumped a Marshall Plan, pumped a lot of money into Ukraine, into building up a really solid economy, making things flourish, because had that happened, had the Russian population, the Russian voters seen, right, they're doing an orange revolution over there, and then they are so well off, they would have never supported Putin's authoritarianism as
for
they
Crimea
had.
Annexation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was probably Akunin went after already the 2004 movement. And that, of course, is something we should blame the West much more for not having done.
One more question, last but not the least, let's not talk about who didn't do something to prevent this. It's obviously not useful for now.
You can see, I'm evading your questions because I have no clue, Studia.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what we can expect in the nearest future. Who will be able to shape the post-war Russia? And will it be the way this Russia as it is now, how you say, or will Russia gradually spread across the other countries of the Western world and will quietly bring this Ruski Mir to these countries, or will quietly assimilate finally and leave everybody alone?
I mean, I don't want Russian culture to die, so I wouldn't want them to assimilate, and also assimilating will be those who, what does it bring the world if some rich kids become Western rich kids? There's nothing gained from that. I think Russia could down in terms of just a kind of, it's bombed itself metaphorically into medieval age. Just in terms of the cultural production in the country, and just the level of just this closeness, this isolation will have an impact on for generations. It will be grim, no question. If things it could of course break up. There've long been all these attempts to make Siberia independent. Of course, it could fall into pieces, which probably would not even be such a. It could come along with a lot of war conflicts on a very regional, small level, but it might also weaken Russia overall and not make it impossible for something what they've done repeat itself. I think, nevertheless, while it will require a lot of, it will nevertheless be a question of how the West, what the West decides to do, and hopefully that will be reasonable. And it doesn't make sense to fall back into a Cold War thinking. It needs a solution that kills off a regime and political ambitions that produce the current nightmare, but nevertheless also brings out the Russians back from the medieval times they are in right now.
But at the end, I hope that this book and the question that you put in this, your works will help wise people to find this answer. who is to blame and what to do with all of this. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
I hope it will work out. Thank you very much for this interview. Thank you for your time. And I will remind our audience that we got a chance to talk with the author of new book that you can find in Russian translation already. It's called Rich Russians from Oligarchs to Bourgeoisie. It's Elisabeth Schimpfossl, and she is also investigator of the Russian soul as well. Among other social and historical and political items. Anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you.